Hey, it's great to be here. It's a lot of fun for us to kind of go around talking to different groups, but even more importantly, it's exciting when we come into a community that's kind of really ready to embrace some new ideas and change. You know, the work that we do is a little bit, well, we tell people it's a little bit like a vampirism, that we have to be invited in order for it to really take hold. So thank you for inviting me in. Hopefully you will not regret it. And we're going to start here. All good stories start at the beginning. And we're going to talk a little bit about the rainforest, kind of where some of these ideas came from, and kind of help you get inside of our head. And then some of you, how many of you are going to be here the next couple of days for the workshop? Okay, a number of you. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take some of these ideas, delve a lot deeper into them, and actually put you guys to work. So that will be a lot of fun. So human society comes from the plains and the veldts. And we were born into tribes. And it was in those kind of small communal living groups that we really kind of figured out how to become economically prosperous. We took the knowledge that we had and we learned how to plant crops. And this yielded the agrarian societies. We learned how to domesticate animals. And then eventually we learned to harness the resources around us. And modern economic progress kind of started here. But one of the challenges of economic progress is that the way we've thought about it, neoclassical economics, has said that we measure economic productivity and output based on a set of inputs that we have into the system. We add value to those raw inputs. And what comes out the back, hopefully, is more valuable than what went in the front end. And the differential is productivity, efficiency, it's economic prosperity, it's all those great things that we really like. But the fact is we're actually biology, we're not buildings. And if you really think about economic progress, it's really about human beings acting in a certain way that actually add the value to what we're doing. It's not just the raw input. If you put a bunch of things into a stew, if you don't stir the pot, then no value is really created. So this is the first question, the first test for you. So what really is it that drives economic progress? And I gave you a little bit of a hint. So we said that, you know, it's us as human beings, but what is it about us as human beings that makes us so much different than, let's say, other species? Well, one is we have the unique ability for prospective memory and to actually think about the future. And to by our actions, by changing our actions today, we can actually change the outcomes of what is our destiny. So just by thinking about things, by manifesting that future, we can actually change things. The other two things are, one is that we have the ability to specialize. So what's great about living in the world today is I don't have to grow my own food, I don't have to sew my own clothes, I don't have to build my own house. We can have a specialty. I can be a total geek who's a researcher and an entrepreneur and a venture capitalist and do those things that I enjoy doing, that I like doing, that I receive value for doing, but then trade that specialty to others who can do things for us. And human beings also have the ability to create markets, and we can trade that specialty in those markets, and the more efficient those markets become, the more our society progresses economically and human welfare-wise. But there's a big challenge, particularly in the world today, in that we as human beings have to act out, but we're separated. And we're separated by things like geography, time zones, culture, language. And those cultures and those changes, or differentials, really present a problem, particularly as we scale across entire systems. And this is the military-industrial complex, and you can say that we liked things nice and linear because they made things highly efficient. The more we could order our world around us, the more, or the better we can allocate resources around us, the more efficiently we can grow. And this just translated, additionally, into the world we live in today. It really hasn't changed all that much. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, you know, why should we care? Why bother? Why should we even think about these kinds of things? Well, the reason is in the United States, this was a study that was done by the Kauffman Foundation. It showed nearly 100% of all net new jobs originated from startups. that the ebb and flow in large companies stays roughly about the same, but it's the startups that not only create a lot of the new economic activity, but that economic activity has the potential to produce disproportionate economic outcomes in the world. So this is where kind of our journey on the rainforest started. So I'm a biologist by background. I'm not an academic, I'm an entrepreneur, but I studied in university, actually at UCSD. I graduated with 3 degrees: economics, biochemistry, music. So for a lot of people, they say, wow, you know, that's kind of the Renaissance person. No, it just meant that I hadn't the slightest idea what I wanted to do with when I graduated. Music was a passion of mine. I loved playing music. I was a jazz musician. I actually went to school on a partial music scholarship. Economics, I always knew that business would come in handy at some point. And to be honest, biochemistry is what I did to please my parents because I was pre-med. And so it worked out that I didn't know at the time, but that today I'm standing here and I actually have the ability to merge all 3 of these disciplines into what I do today. And I think that nature is one of the most perfect designers. In fact, probably almost every problem that you want to solve today has probably already been solved by nature in some way. And if you actually look at our portfolio of investments at T2, we have a number of biomimicry and bioinspiration companies in the portfolio. And it's kind of cool, actually. But I've always been a big fan of biology and nature and what it's created. I live in a very natural setting in San Diego. And that same bio-natural design translates into our human design. So it's not that unusual for us to kind of think about it. And the rise of the industrial economies was one way for us to take, or for me to take, a lot of these ideas that I had about human systems, about economic systems, around our environmental systems, and apply it to our work in the rainforest. So the rise of the industrial economy looks a little like this. And this was a study that I read, The Image of Limited Good. And I'll give you this short summary. It basically says there's only so much good in the world. Good people, good food, good land, good ideas. And the race is on. He who dies with the most toys wins. It's all about zero-sum game. Because if you have it, I don't. There's a finite amount in the world. And so this translated into a lot of our current behaviors, which is those of scarcity. That in our industrial paradigms, in our agrarian paradigms, it was that there was only so much good land, good food, good water. And we had to figure out not only how to take our resources that we had at our disposal, but allocate them very, very carefully, because any waste in the system was going to be put against us in the debit column. And it would diminish our returns on the credit column. So we set up these mindsets of scarcity and zero-sum game, and these are the kinds of models we created. So this is a vineyard in the Napa Valley, not that far from where our office is in Northern California. And one of the first things you notice when you look at this is how perfect it almost looks. It's very linear. And we kind of like that linearity. It gives us comfort. But there is a method to the madness of why it's so linear. One of the reasons is, well, it's highly efficient. Because when I want to run an irrigation line to water the vines, I can run it straight down each row. When I want to plant them, I can plant straight in a row. When I want to harvest the grapes, I can run them right down the middle of the vines. And what's great about that is at the end of the day, I hopefully have really, really good grapes. Because everything I'm doing is for those grapes that you see. Nothing else really matters. In fact, if a weed grows up in my vineyard, I pull it out. Because it competes for resources. It's not supposed to be there. It has a negative impact on the system. So we look at the friction within the system as bad. We want to remove it. Anything that competes for our outcome and our attention is bad. So now we're going to move more into the knowledge and creative economies, what we experience today. And this will explain systems like the Silicon Valley, Herzliya, Israel, Boston, San Diego, Austin. And these are of mindsets of abundance, a very, very different way of thinking. In the plantation model, it's all about the engineering of process. We take knowledge, we engineer process, and the more efficient our processes are, the better our outcomes will be. In knowledge systems, it's built on mindsets of abundance. So in the first model, if you have an apple and I have an orange, no matter how many times we pass them around, slice them, divide them, share them, we always will have a net gain or a net sum of one apple and one orange. But if you have an idea and I have an idea and we share those ideas with one another, we now each have two ideas. And if you multiply that across an entire system, the knowledge capacity of a community approaches infinity. Now, this particular idea is of a lot of interest to regions and governments around the world because everyone's trying to figure out how to do more with less. The other thing is that we find about knowledge workers is that they can work much later in life. They're less of a burden on healthcare systems. Their productivity, when expanded out across a career, is greater. So this concept of abundance, that there's plenty for everyone, is quite powerful. And these models look a lot like rainforests, hence the name that we came up with the book. Now, the thing you notice about the rainforest is when you look at that, it's very lush, it's very green, it's very robust. But you don't really know what you're supposed to be looking at. In aggregate, it looks great. But if I were to say, what's the most important thing in that picture right there? It's kind of like a Where's Waldo. You just really have no idea because you're not really know where you're supposed to look. In fact, what's even harder is probably the most important thing in that rainforest you're standing on. It's the weeds. The weeds are the high output startups in the Silicon Valley. Those are the Facebooks, those are the YouTubes, the Googles of the world. So as an example, when we were writing the book, we went and talked to Kathy Koo at Stanford University. She runs technology transfer there. She has for over 25 years. And every year, Kathy has her licensing officers in the technology transfer office write down what they think is going to be the next big thing. They have never gotten it right. In fact, they actually thought Google was a dumb idea. And not only did they think Google was a dumb idea, so did every venture capitalist in the Silicon Valley the first time around. Wall Street had already said search had been optimized, and advertising dollars for revenue, that wasn't scalable. That's just not interesting. Because if Yahoo hadn't done it, and Alta Vista, if these companies hadn't done it, what was a company with a very funny name going to do? Not only do these companies and the business models look a little odd, if you think those look odd, the people who run them look even stranger. The Steve Jobs, the Bill Gates, the Mark Zuckerbergs. When you meet these people, one of the things you notice is they're a bit socially odd. In fact, they say entrepreneurs run the gamut between Asperger's and psychotics. And you kind of have to figure out kind of where they're sociopaths and psychotics at one end, you got the Asperger's and autism at the other end. You got to kind of figure out where they're at. Luckily, most of the ones we've worked with are closer to the Asperger and autism. There's a great movie, it's called Something Ventured, and you can rent it on Netflix. It's about the history of the Silicon Valley and the venture community, and they do a series of case studies in it. And they've got Arthur Rock, one of the most esteemed, venerable venture capitalists. He helped to create the entire venture capital industry. He talks about the first time he met Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. And he said they came into his office, and he said, these are two of the most unappealing people you would ever want to meet. He said Steve Jobs smelled funny. He had really dirty feet. He had this horrible attention deficit disorder. And he was incredibly arrogant. Everything we're taught is the anti-traits of a leader. Everything we're taught to say, let's push these people to the margin. And yet there was something about not only what Arthur Rock saw, but people have seen in people like Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg that say they're a little odd, but there's something very, very special there. In fact, Ron Conway, who's the most successful of the angel capitalists in the Valley, and just to give you a few, he was the first investor, let's see, in Facebook, Google, PayPal, Zynga. So those are just a few of the ones that he was the first investor, and so he has a great pattern recognition. And he said, I would never fire or allow to be fired a product visionary CEO, no matter how bad a CEO they are. He said, because it's much easier to hire Sheryl Sandberg as CEO than it is to find the visionary Mark Zuckerberg. And of course, we learned some of those same lessons with Apple too, when John Sculley, an executive who sold soft drinks, came in to run Apple. Now, I don't mean this to be a very binary conversation to say, you know, well, you got to be at one extreme. It's just that the creative geniuses of these people, one, they look like weeds. Two, there's something very special, and if we can find a way of harnessing that specialness in those people and really encouraging that, then finding the more traditional skill sets to put around them can be a very powerful combination. So look for the weeds and encourage the weeds. When you encourage the weeds, you need to let them spread. So one of the ideas that I'm developing in San Diego is an institute for high potential leaders, because most leadership programs don't really address these very awkward people who stay in the shadows, and even to come into a room like this makes them very, very uncomfortable with this many people. There's a joke that's saying that you can tell the real introverted entrepreneurs in the valley because they end up staring at their shoes the whole time. And you can tell who the extroverted entrepreneurs are because they stare at your shoes all the time. You know, so it's just a bit different. So now we come to the part which is your next question here. So one of the themes for us around the book was, you know, what causes innovation to happen? And if we can figure out what causes innovation to happen, how do we make more of it happen? Is it just fatalistic that it just somehow happens, or are there things you can proactively do to make it happen? And we found the answer in reading a book, The Rational Optimist by Matt Ridley. And he came up with, this is where innovation happens. Innovation happens when ideas have sex. So as a venture capitalist, as a mentor, I know exactly what my job is now, that I am there to promote promiscuity of ideas, to make lots of this happen. And, you know, our people in the community, you know, we're here to build the brothels of the world and to get a lot of this going. But today, well, actually, the brothels, for those of you who don't know this, how many of you know what this is? That's the HP garage. Hewlett-Packard garage. Doesn't look very remarkable, huh? So Hewlett and Packard started HP, 1939. That's where they started that. It's a museum today that you can actually go see. But it's completely unremarkable. What was remarkable about what they did was how the ecosystem around them helped build one of the most enduring brands and companies of the modern technological age. But there's nothing particularly interesting about this. And this is a very, very strong point that so often regions tend to over-focus on, let's build really beautiful incubators and tech parks, and if we build it, they will come, what we call the field of dreams model. The thing is, these things are not nearly as meaningful as the behaviors and the culture of the place.
It looks like a weed.
It is a weed. This is what our brothels look like today. This happens to be an incubator in San Diego, Evo Nexus. This is where ideas go to have sex. And it's nicer because we can draw the shades and people can have privacy. So one of the points I want to get across right now is that, you know, this is not always about technology, and we're going to talk a little bit about this more tomorrow. But technological innovation is wonderful as a tool, but what really has driven economic progress across the ages is our organizational models and our organizational behavior. Those are far more effective in terms of deal support and diffusion of new ideas than anything. So, our next question when we wrote the book was, well, instead of engineering process in the plantation, in the rainforest, what we're really trying to do is, how do we engineer serendipity? Because if we can increase the chance encounters of things bumping up into one another, then our hypothesis is you should be able to get more innovation outcomes from it. And so really what we're trying to do is, instead of engineering an engineering process, we want to, how do you engineer an environment around us to create more serendipity? And so we said, yes, we think we can do this. And this was an interesting story. One of our colleagues in San Diego, Sanjay Jha, who's the CEO of Motorola, hated the fact that the iPhones were so successful. He could not understand it because as an engineer, he thought that they were inferior as a piece of technology. And so he gave the iPhone to his team to say, I want you to find out what it is so about this iPhone that makes it so special. And they took it apart, and from there they created the actual first Droid, so the first Android platform phone. And it never sold as well as the iPhone. People still wanted an iPhone. And it didn't dawn on him until a few years later why that was. Because people like Bill Gates and Sanjay, and by the way, that's Gates and Jobs up there. People like these people who were engineers saw everything as an engineering problem that you then designed. And what Steve Jobs saw was that everything was a design issue that could then be engineered. And to be honest, I subscribe to that. I subscribe to that. Doesn't mean that there aren't engineering challenges that we have to work out. But design matters a lot, particularly in things that we see and we touch and we interact with in our world, because we do care about those things. We have emotions, and we do care about them. So in our work, we've taken a lot of the design thinking process and principles, and we partner with Stanford University on this, and they have a D school there. And it's really about how do you find a way of observing the world around you and designing things that interface well with the world. And can you do the same thing beyond just a product, beyond just a cell phone? And of course, we know we love design in our things such as our furniture around us. And I have one of these chairs, and even though this was designed many years ago, Eames chair, it's still a wonderfully utilitarian, functional, and also very, very comfortable. And it's also beautiful and pleasing to the eye. But we design our buildings around us as well, because we like to live and work in nice surroundings. And of course, we design our communities around us. So, is there some reason that we can't take the evolution of design thinking and take it beyond objects, beyond the buildings around us, beyond the cities that we do, and now saying, can you actually design your own economy? And the answer is absolutely we can. And this is our process. This is the rainforest process. And we're going to jump into it a lot tomorrow. The questions don't really matter. But what you will notice is it is a very cyclical process. That it's a process of assessing, observing. You are then designing something to fit those needs. You build them and then you iterate. And it's a constant cycle that flows into one another. And we actually created two different courses and ways of working with regions to actually address that. And if you notice, we use a lot of architectural and building metaphors because we feel that they fit very, very well with what we do. And this is what we're also going to jump into very heavily. This is the Rainforest Canvas. And what this is a way for us to take a lot of the assumptions that we have in the community, a lot of the questions we have about your community, and what we want to do with this is construct a regional genome. So just as in your own human genome, there are those things that are environmentally influenced, things that we will be able to proactively change based on our prospective actions that we're able to do. And there's things that we're not going to be able to change. You're not going to be able to change the fact that you get a lot of snow here. That's just part of who you are and what you are. And so it's understanding those. And this is actually a workshop that we did in Italy. This is one in Rome where we did the canvas exercise. And this is what we kind of learned. Is very often we know the kinds of outcomes we want as a community. All of you here in the room, both individually for your own lives and your own careers, but also for the community in general, are striving for a set of outcomes you want. It may be more jobs, it may be greater prosperity in the community, it may be more technologies moving out of the university into the public sector, it may be more talent, but there's a set of things you want. And traditionally what we do is we say, okay, what do we have to do to get those? If I just do those actions, we'll get them. So we want more startups, let's build an incubator. And that's where we focused all these years. What we did when we were doing the research in the book We've learned how to deconstruct that by saying one of the problems with that previous model is that we only focus on the actions. Then what happens is we're going to create mechanisms to drive those actions, but the minute we stop doing those, people are going to go back to their old behaviors. As an example, we were doing a project in the United Kingdom for Gordon Brown on their innovation, and they said, you know, we set up all these funding schemes to fund startup entrepreneurs, but the minute we either cut back or take away the money, everything completely ceases to exist. So have we fundamentally changed the world? We want to be a catalyst, but a true catalyst remains the same out the backside. He says what we've really created is this very unhealthy codependency in the community, that the only way we can get actions is if we are enabling them to happen. How do we kind of get that to change? And we said, well, we know that all actions really stem from a set of behaviors. And our behaviors really stem from our attitudes, and our attitudes stem from our beliefs. So once we had that in our framework, we then went around and looked at some of these systems like the Silicon Valley, like Israel, and what we found is absolutely that what was fundamentally different about these places wasn't that they had smarter people or more money or better technology or better universities, is that they had a very much a different fundamental belief system. And this is really where we need to focus. So we also understand that emotions can be very, very powerful, that when we're talking about beliefs have a strong emotional context to them. And on the left, when you're in mindsets of the scarcity, the plantation models we are looking, it can set up a lot of competition, negative, fear-based emotions. Fear is a very powerful emotion. It's a very powerful negative emotion. Most of us don't do things in our life because of fear, because we're afraid. The positive side of the emotions that we have, particularly those of hope and love and trust, are very positive emotions. And if we can just figure out how to move from one side to the other, we think that we can fundamentally change and create a sustainable culture within a community. And what's even better about this is that if you can create positive emotions, you can make money off of it as well. So it's not just a matter of making people feel better so that they're more productive, but you can actually charge more for that emotional well-being. You know, instead of charging a few dollars or a few cents for a set of raw inputs to a cup of coffee, you gladly will pay $5 for a venti macchiato, caramel macchiato at Starbucks for the pure joy of the experience of going there to do that. The same thing, by the way, was very much about Apple realized in their products. So if you actually look at an iPad, and if you look at the value add that Foxconn, basically the company that puts a lot of the hardware together inside of it, they add $5 of incremental value to each iPad. Now most of us spend $500 or more for an iPad. So you can tell there's a lot to be made off of human emotion. But we really have to create a fundamental shift in order to get there. And this is the first step in that shift. Now, the first step is we have to move away from what we call an ego system and move towards an ecosystem. And what that really looks like is the ecosystem are very hierarchical pyramids. We're all familiar with this, command and control. We have all these great words where the person at the top holds a lot of the power, the resources, the knowledge, and then based on a set of permissions, they hand them down. And information flows back up on that same permission. And it's on a discrete allocation knowledge set. And power, the greatest power is usually held at the top and then flows down. In an ecosystem, everybody and everything in that system plays an equal and important role. It's kind of like what Shakespeare said, you know, we're merely players and each one have we're actors, and we each have our entrances and our exits. In the ecosystem, everyone plays a role, and part of it is just a matter of timing, and then where you jump in and play a role. But you all have an equal and important role in the system. And the way we broke it up in the rainforest is we looked at things between hardware and software. And where this idea came from is, even in San Diego, we had a lot of people coming to us and saying, we want to buy the recipe book for San Diego. Can you just give it to us in a nice little package? We'll take it away and we'll just kind of follow the directions and we will create a culture. We'll create an economy. And they were really disappointed when it didn't work that well. Because of what we in this room all know now is that culture plays a pretty strong role, that innovation is not prescriptive, economic development is not prescriptive, that human beings have to feel good and feel purpose in what they do in order to be productive. And so we separated out the difference between the assets of the hardware and the culture with the software. And we're going to jump into this again tomorrow, so we're just touching on it lightly today. But what we do know is we touched on some human behavioral psychology in the book when we were researching it. And what we learned is what you all know, is that in the world we all act out on our thoughts and our ideas. And when we step out in the world and we create an action, the world pushes back to us with some kind of a reaction. And if that reaction is positive, we tend to feel pretty good about it, and we tend to want to do more of that. And if it's really negative, it makes us usually feel not so good, and we tend not to do as much of that. We don't like to do things that make us feel bad, and we tend to like to do things that make us feel good, and we're basically selfish about that. Well, the same thing happens in places like the Silicon Valley, that you take places where if I take a risk and I express myself and I do something crazy and everyone just slaps me down, and if I get slapped down enough, I may still think crazy, but I probably won't share it with the people in my immediate community. But in places like the Valley where people applaud you and say, all right, so what if that didn't work out? The next one will work out, or the one after that will work out. That same person I was telling you about, Ron Conway, he's invested in every one of Sean Parker's companies. He's only made money off of one of them. But the one that he made money off of was Facebook, that he led him to. Because he just believed in the person. And innovation is also about role models. It's about us aspiring and helping. We had a conversation earlier, in fact in the same room, with some of our colleagues here. And we were talking about the importance of hope and inspiration. The one thing that you really feel when you go into these economically charged communities that focus on innovation is the amount of hope that's there. Everyone wakes up every morning believing that the world will be better and that they can change the world. And that hope is a very, very powerful motivator, because no matter what happens, you always know that there's something better on the back side of it. And a lot of that is because of role models. We see people doing things and we're going, I can not only do that, but I think I can do it better, faster, cheaper. But this is the hard part of it, unfortunately, is that before you can get there, you have to do a lot of unlearning. Because the way we learn, just the natural human way of learning, is that information comes to us and we attach it to context, and we often will attach an emotion to it, and we'll put it on the shelf, and then when we need to remember it, we'll pull it back up in that context and in that with that emotion. The thing is, if we create the wrong contextual relationships with the new knowledge, it doesn't quite stick. So one of the things we do with groups that we work with is when regions are trying to build these rainforests, we actually bring them to the Valley and to San Diego to actually see how communities behave. Because once they can see that, it's almost as if they can be rewired. And so there's a bit of unlearning. It's kind of like therapy, rehab, that you have to go to. And one of the first steps is you have to see that which is implicit and implied, and you have to make it explicit. An example. So one of our projects is in Palestine that we did. It was a project for the State Department, USAID. And it was basically getting Palestinian entrepreneurs to work with Israeli CEOs. Okay? And to build Palestinian software companies. The problem is that in the Palestinian territories, there was what we called a donor mentality there. And what that meant is that they were so used to foreign aid organizations coming over, the only thing they wanted was just give us our money, go away. We don't want your help. And we went in and said, it's not going to work that way. Not only are we going to be doing stuff for you and not just giving you your money, we're going to be providing you services. We were doing entrepreneurial mentoring and coaching. But we also want you to sign this document. And what the document said is, you're going to be receiving services for which you're not paying, but we would like you to acknowledge that there actually is value in what we are delivering to you. And we expect you to show up. We expect you to be present, to do the work that's asked of you, to be respectful, and if at the end of the entire process you feel you've received value, we're not going to be chasing you around, but if you think you've received value, what we would like to do is we hope that you will give back into the system in some meaningful way. And it will be meaningful to you, not to us. It will be meaningful to you. You'll open a door for another entrepreneur. You'll make an introduction. You will mentor somebody else. You may fund them. That's up to you. But we hope you will give back into the system. You will pay it forward into the system. And then we make them sign it. We call it the social contract. That has been a very, very powerful way of starting the process, because by physically signing a document, we begin to change our mindset in terms of not only what is possible, but what we now feel our obligation is to the system. And they can take the form, but you take that which is implicit and you make it explicit. And we see these implicit behaviors in the Silicon Valley. People take meetings with each other all the time, and they pay it forward, and they do all really cool things. But in many other places we work, it's just, they go, why would someone give their time to mentor me where they're not getting paid? That just doesn't make any sense. The other thing was this particular study, the science of motivation, explicit versus tacit knowledge. What the study, and we're going to actually see the video of this tomorrow in the workshop, what the study found is that if I task you to do something that's highly mechanical in nature, kind of very linear, I want you to take this from point A to point B, or I want you to assemble more of these widgets into more of this final product, and I say, you know, if you produce twice as many of these products, I'm going to pay you twice as much, you will actually get a good result. Because there's a direct correlation between the incentive and what we're asking people to do. That's the explicit part of it. If I want you to solve a problem for me, or I want you to be creative, and I said, you know, if you delivered this creative solution in half the time, I'll pay you twice as much. You actually get an inferior result. You get a worse result. What they find is that for people working in areas of tacit creativity, knowledge type work, they need enough money to where money is not a worry, but there's no direct correlation between what you pay and the outcome it produces. That's one of the reasons things like grand challenges do so well, is because you can put out prize money, but people participate for the joy of solving things, potentially collaborating, doing things together, and the return on their involvement exceeds the return on the investment for them. So they redefine the ROI. And what they found is that the three things mattered in the knowledge economy to knowledge workers. One, autonomy. That people felt like, although they could work in teams, that they had the ability to have an idea, to develop that idea, and to be creative in their own space. Two, mastery. That once they had an idea, that they had the ability to actually carry it far enough along to know whether it was going to work or not work, and they could become proficient at it. And the third is purpose. They had to feel like what they were doing actually mattered, and it not only mattered to the world around them, but it mattered to them personally. And when they found that, the people produced superior results. This next comment goes pretty much to all of us, but it specifically goes to the millennials. This new generation that's coming up that will be in our workforce very soon is in terms of what they respond to. One is they like authenticity. So if you build a really, really nice incubator for them, they're probably not going to feel as comfortable as if you give them just an old warehouse with, you know, a blow-up dinosaur in the corner and a foosball table. That feels more authentic to them. And that's what they respond to. They want to feel a place that feels like them. The other thing is they want to feel legitimacy. They don't have to be right, they just have to be heard. They have to feel like they have purpose and meaning, and they want to be legitimized. And if you create systems for taking those people, you'll be a long ways along. The rules of the rainforest, these are kind of, you know, our 10 commandments in the rainforest. And you look at those and you say, well, most of those seem pretty intuitive. And that's the great thing about these types of things, is that they are very much intuitive. But you have to see that you have to be able to trust others, and you have to be trustworthy and back. Number 5 is actually my favorite, which is you seek fairness, not advantage. Because in the industrial paradigms, we're taught to always maximize advantage. Buy low, sell high. Anything else is waste and you're a fool because you left money on the table. But in the Valley, if you can imagine when Arthur Rock met with Jobs and Wozniak, if he said, and just beat them down to the lowest possible price, Apple would, I can almost assuredly tell you that Apple would not have been born. Because these are partnerships we form with these startup companies. Because we are investing not in a set of tangibles, we're not investing in cash flow, we're not investing in equipment, we're not investing in buildings and land. We're investing in people and the potential of those people to build on their idea. And it has to be a partnership. I'm responsible for helping to put the capital together, helping you make a lot of the business decisions and help you formulate your business models, but it's up to you to build your dream. And I want you to do that. And this is a very different concept for a lot of people to go in. If you actually look at the term sheets of venerable venture capital firms like Kleiner Perkins, and you actually read them, they're very simple, plain vanilla term sheets. You would think that they're like, oh, because we've got such a big name, we want 80% of your company. They don't do that. They're actually very, very fair terms. What's especially, we're talking about the HP garage. If you look at this, this is the set of rules that were put together 1941. And I think it says 1939 on there, but this was actually written in 1941. For the rules of the HP garage. They look very, very similar to the rules of the rainforest that we had. So after 70 years, things look pretty much the same in terms of basic human principles and motivations. And this is what changed the culture. They created the culture of the Silicon Valley for what they're doing. Now, as you're engaging people, one of the things that was interesting when we were researching the book is people said, oh, you got to think outside the box. In order to be creative and innovative, you got to think outside the box. I do not agree with that. The reason is, it's realizing the box doesn't exist. When we talked to a number of entrepreneurs that were successful, and we said, if you could take the wisdom you have today and go back to the beginning and start over, what would you do differently? And a large number of them said we would never have tried to build our company. Because it was almost knowing certain things would keep us from doing it. Because part of the reason we were able to be successful is because we didn't know we couldn't be successful. And that's a very, very powerful. That's why, and this of course is more relevant in the technology fields than it is, let's say, in healthcare, biotech that you're doing. But it's very, very powerful to inspire people to dream big. So here's your next question. 20 years from now, what's going to be the next Google, Facebook, the big disruptive company that will change the face of your community, the world? We haven't the slightest idea. And part of the reason that I haven't the slightest idea is because there's a very good chance that the idea hasn't even been thought of yet. And the way things are going now, there's probably a pretty good chance that the person who's going to think of that idea isn't even born yet. And so question for us as community leaders is, how do we prepare our community for something that we haven't the slightest idea what's going to happen? If we don't know not only what the companies are, but what industries and what sectors are going to be relevant and important, what are we supposed to be doing now to make sure? Well, the answer is we've got to build an environment, a system that is highly modular and flexible so that when it is stressed and when demands are put on it from the environment, it adapts and is changed. So the Darwinian process of evolution, as you know, he didn't say that the strongest survive, he said the most adaptable survive. And when you look at the Silicon Valley, you see this entire process of invention and reinvention. Invention and reinvention. It's this very cyclical process. It is not linear. One of the mantras that we live by is, it's not about not failing. You've got to fail. The only way is you've got to be able to fail. The reason that it works in places like the Silicon Valley and other places is because if I'm an entrepreneur and I'm standing up on this stage right here and I jump off, it doesn't hurt because I didn't fall very far. Too many of our other communities, let their entrepreneurs get too far before they fall, and it hurts a lot more. They break a leg. So really what we do at places like Connect and in the incubators and accelerators of the Valley is we create a very safe environment to fail. And we want you to fail often and fail cheap, fail quick. And so we want that. We want that recirculation of ideas. So many of us think that startup companies, that we have a really good idea, it's meant to succeed. And if it doesn't, it's because of something out there that somehow just screwed us in some way. And that's not the truth. Startup companies, almost by default, are meant to fail. They're programmed to fail. And somehow you have to go against the natural order of things to get these companies to succeed. It could be running into the right mentor. It could be finding the right source of financing. It could be just market timing and pure luck. And working with Mr. Buffett, as I did at Berkshire Hathaway, it's always better to be lucky than smart. But you better know the difference. The other thing is understanding that the mistakes are what actually allow us to succeed. Those aren't necessarily new ideas to you, but we have to keep reminding ourselves of this. But what we do need to remind ourselves of is that this is a new paradigm, a new order of things. That where we are is on the left, where we need to move to is on the right. That we need to move away from a system where we're always predicting and repeating. And we need to move to something where we're learning and adapting. We need to move away from business planning and learn how to do business modeling. And for those of you not in the business world, the difference is, business plans, we write these very elegant, long papers, and the minute we wrote them, it's pretty much irrelevant. We can use it as a doorstop at that point. What a business model is, it's a place to gather all of your hypotheses, and inside of this room, there isn't a single fact in this room, unless it relates directly to this room. Every fact about what we want to do about our business exists out there in the market. And the only way we're going to know is by going out into the market and testing it. So the question is how do we kind of build these lean startups and build these businesses to do it? The other thing about innovation, this is one that none of us likes. These are two things that have to exist in order for innovation to happen. And for those of you who are going to sit through the workshop the next couple of days, I can guarantee you, you're going to experience this. We don't know what's going to always happen at any moment in time. We don't have everything figured out. And guess what? That's totally okay. Because as things present themselves, we'll make decisions, we'll learn how to adapt, and we'll mold. And if we did something wrong, we'll do a course correction. And we may feel a little uncomfortable, but there will be other people feeling uncomfortable with us. And that will be just fine. We're very, very comfortable with that. The other thing that's really interesting is you get the best results when you get people in a room who are uninformed and intelligent. And that actually goes against a lot of what we think. We think that we get the best results when we always go to the experts. But when you go to experts, and that, believe me, that does not saying that experts don't play a very definitive and important role. They absolutely do. But if you go to them to solve the big disruptive challenges and the big important challenges, you'll always get iterative thinking upon the existing ideas. Whereas if you get people who are uninformed and intelligent, what you will do is you will get new and creative ideas, things we hadn't even thought of, things that will actually do end runs around what we were even thinking about. And the more people we ask, the better. So there's a company in Australia called Atlassian. And Atlassian had a very, very big effect on many companies in the Silicon Valley that now use their idea. And they started something called FedEx Days. And so what FedEx Days were is they started out with one Thursday a month. They allowed all the employees in the company to work on something that had absolutely nothing to do with their day job. It wasn't so much taking the day off, but they got to work on something completely different. The thing is, the next day they had to come in and talk about it. Or they could come up with an idea. That is where, and Google ended up taking that idea. That is actually where Gmail came out of. How many of you use Gmail? Gmail was never on the production slate for Google. It actually came out of one of these FedEx Thursdays. And the reason they call them FedEx Days is because you had to deliver overnight. So, and they still do it. And a lot of companies have actually done it to where people can spend 2 to 3 days a month actually doing these. And they let secretaries do this. They let people who are the maintenance workers in the companies do that. And they've come up with actually some of the best ideas for the company, because people see problems in a very, very different light. I added this actually tonight because in some of our conversations, you know, SUNY Oswego has a very strong history of education. And basically not only educating its students, but also training the next generation of educators in the community. But the way we find that we teach is quite different today with a lot of our knowledge workers. And I teach at our business school in San Diego. And it's the difference between what we call exploration and navigation. That I think the skills of learning how to use a compass and a sextant and knowing how to navigate your way around is probably more important than knowing how to read a map. Because if you are just looking at a map, the minute you're off the map, you're not going to know what to do. So how many of you know what this is? So this is the Borgia map, 1400s, late 1400s, around the time of Columbus for it. And they would have a sign. How many of you know what Hickson Draconis is? There you go. A gamer, or just you happen to know that, or you just know Latin? Just Latin. Here be dragons. They actually put that on the map, on the corners of maps. And basically it was meant to deter you from ever going off anywhere that wasn't directly on the map, because you'd be eaten by dragons. Some of the Chinese maps actually got quite graphic, and they showed people being swallowed by these things. And so then you had people like Christopher Columbus said, you know, I don't subscribe to that. I'm going to go off the edges of the map. And he was really more of an entrepreneur than we realized, because here was a guy who was able to go to a set of patrons, convince them to give them money, without them ever knowing whether they'd ever get that money back or even see him again. He then was able to convince a group of people to go with him on this insane voyage with him, with nothing more than just a great story and perhaps a little money. He never actually achieved his original intent and goal, and yet he became very famous for having achieved something significant. Anyway, so this is a, you know, kind of a definitive entrepreneur in our eyes. So now we kind of get into the kind of detail stuff. This is the end of the presentation. But when we get ready to build our communities, our rainforests, the first step isn't to focus on the fruit or even the branches. The first step is to say, let's look at our roots. Because the roots will determine how strong and adaptable, flexible our systems are. And just like any root system, we're going to have to study what those are, but also how they're nourished. And so we look at the actual roots of the rainforest, and these are the 10 roots. And tomorrow we're actually going to be doing an exercise and asking you, so be thinking about these. We're going to be asking you to identify, what do you think you guys are really strong in? What do you guys think that you need to be working on in these root systems? And we'll do an assessment. We'll test your roots, as they say. And I'll just go back a second just in case. These were not accidental in terms of what they look. These are all the things for a community that are really, really important to supporting it. And some of them are you know, broader topics than others, but we'll be focusing on those deeply. So we have the roots of the rainforest, and these are the tools we're going to use to actually build the rainforest. The first is innovation and entrepreneurship is a body contact sport. You can't think it into existence. You have to get out there and do it, and you're going to get bloody doing it. It's like boxing. You know, you're not only going to, you know, it's one thing to be able to learn how to throw a punch. You're going to have to learn how to take a punch. You're going to have to take a fall. You're going to also have to learn, get good pattern recognition. So when someone's throwing a punch, you're going to have to learn when to duck, which way. And the more you do it, the better you're going to be. Practice, practice, practice. Enhancing diversity. This is not just ethnic diversity, it's not cultural diversity, although it includes those things, but it's just diversity of thought. As I said with the Atlassian, getting administrative assistants and management and maintenance workers together basically gives a diversity of perspective and a diversity of opinions, which is absolutely important. The idea in the plantation model was, let's remove all the friction, because friction is heat, heat is waste. In the knowledge economy, in the rainforest, heat is good as long as we have a place to channel it. So what we want to do is figure out a way of building the right kind of chimneys to pull the heat. We do that by getting a lot of diversity, and there's a direct correlation between the diversity in a community and the output. 60% in the tech, on the high-tech sector of the Silicon Valley, 60% of the high-tech successful companies have been started by immigrants. And a lot of the ones the big names you've heard of. You not only have to have role models, but you have to celebrate the role models and peer interactions. You've got to really increase them. You've got to build trust, and you've got to build groups of trust. Trust is a theme that you keep hearing over and over. Trust is the currency. It's the money we'll be waving around. We were in a transaction economy, but trust now builds a transaction. It's the single most expensive part of any transaction is trust. We have to create the right kind of feedback loop so that when we do things right, we can get feedback on them. When we do things wrong, we can get feedback on them. But we have to know whether we're doing the right things where we're at. You have to make these social contracts explicit. Oops, and was that the end of that last one? Yeah. And these are just some thoughts. I literally put this together. I've only been in Oswego a few hours, and so I am by no means an expert. These are just some ideas on some random conversations that we've had with people. But the first one is kind of generic for a lot of places. If you see yourselves, and you think of yourselves in your mind as a living laboratory, just as in a laboratory, you're there to experiment and figure out what works and what doesn't work. So really kind of see your place as a living lab. We already talked about the diversity issue. In terms of the social media strategy, one thing we find is that when you tell your stories, you have a way of engaging these people in the community. You have to find out what's important to them. You have to have conversations with them. But more importantly, you have to let them tell you how they want to be involved and how to be involved. And so you've got to use these new tools for having conversations. Hosting the grand challenges we talked about and social contracts. We talked a little bit about the incubating leadership. These people who sit in the shadows, who won't look you in the eye, you have to help incubate them. You've got to help provide mentors for them, because it's a very powerful combination to take these people with high intellect and high potential and give them the right set of tools to be successful. Leverage global practices. Not everything, Picasso said that good artists borrow, but great artists steal. And in San Diego, we steal all the time. I'm going to be very honest with you, part of the reason we created Global Connect was to study how other regions did innovation and to basically bring the best ideas back there and seeing how we could use them to up our own game. Not everything is we have to develop ourselves, and some of these are things that have been launched and developed here in New York State. Hosting a science festival, that was an idea I put up there. What they did at Cambridge University, which was absolutely fascinating, I visited, I guess, 6 years ago. They host a science festival every year where they take all the science and cool stuff that's going on in the university and they push it out into the public, and they created it in a park one weekend. In San Diego, we took the same idea and we did it in Balboa Park. We had 250,000 people show up over a weekend. This was just a way to just basically show what was in there. But leading up to that, we actually had some of our academics. We had lunch with a laureate, where we had these Nobel laureates that went out into the community and talked to high schools and just talked to them. And the theme of our science festival was the science of you. So we had the science of winemaking. We had the science of golf. We just had things that were fun to engage the community and to get them there so that they understood kind of what all this crazy stuff, and to also realize that some of these scientists who work in the university don't look like Einstein. They do triathlons and they surf. They've got families. They race cars. They do kind of fun stuff. And the other thing is we have to find ways of engaging youth early and often for that. Get them in the room. So this is kind of the final thought that we have here, is that the reason that this work is so important is because Everybody matters in this. Everyone has a role to play. Normally when we put groups of people together, especially, let's say, a group like this, several of you I know feel that you have permission not to be engaged or involved because you're thinking, let those guys up front, the ones who decided to sit up front. Those are the type A, people who will want to be close to the teacher. Let them kind of take this on. But everyone really matters. Everyone has to be engaged. Everyone has a voice, but we can only do it if you actually speak up and do the voice. So we really want everyone to kind of be engaged. And this kind of goes without saying. By the way, this book, Trust, was a book that a client made me read years ago, and I was very upset that they made me read it years ago. But today, I'm very, very happy. It's basically about the cost of trust in different cultures. But that's it. And we will take questions now. Everyone gets to ask questions? No questions. We can all go home. We can all go home.
Questions over here.
I thought I'd put you all to sleep.
What do you do in an area that is conservative and inherently risk adverse? What would you recommend?
One. Almost every place. Did someone turn me off? Someone said you've had enough. Almost every place that we work is risk averse. There are very few places that aren't risk averse. We're inherently, by design, hyper aware of the risks around us, and none of us likes to do it because we think we'll feel bad or that we'll be judged because of it. So the one thing is you have to create safe places for people to step out and be risky behavior. So whether it's programs like Connect, or whether it's like the D School, the design school, places where people can come together and co-create and collaborate with one another. One of the ways to do that is, we talked about hosting grand challenges. So one of the things that we've done in several regions is where we've had the government put out a set of grand challenges into the community, and they're saying, so for one of them that just happened recently was a lot of these new social media tools are very, very powerful, and they have the ability to be great communication platforms. How can we as government utilize these tools more effectively? They put a grand challenge out into the community that said, we want the students, we want the entrepreneurs, we want the people in the community to come up with 3 ideas and how we as government can use these social media tools not only to listen to you better, but for us to communicate to you what we're doing. They ended up getting so many great ideas. They ended up funding, originally they were just going to fund 3 of them. They ended up funding 5 of them for the ideas. So you create a place where everyone feels comfortable and you can kind of share the risk. So the basic model of Connect is you identify a problem to be solved, you identify a group of people that can help you solve that problem, and you have to be good in your selection because you have to make sure that it's a relevant fit to the problem. 3 is you then get together and you co-create the solution. So it's a shared initiative. And the next step is the one where almost everybody fails, which is you then have to task the group that created the solution with the implementation. Because very often we bring groups of people together who have high intellect, who are very, very busy in their day job, and we say, God, thanks a lot for helping us come up with this idea. We can take it from here. In fact, I stepped in as the interim director of Connect at a kind of a down point in its history. It just wasn't doing well. It had operated 2 years in the red. And because I was brought in from the outside, I didn't have any legacy with the program. So we had a series of town hall meetings that looked exactly like this one, in rooms just like this. And we got up there and we said, Connect is a community organization. It's an honest, neutral broker. It's a business facilitator within the community. It's an incubator without walls. And if we're not doing something right, it's your fault. And they were like, what? I said, it's your fault. It's your organization. We're merely shepherds. So if we're not doing the right thing and you're not telling us we're not doing the right thing, then we've all failed. So help us understand what we're doing wrong. And they said, what you're doing wrong is that we're writing checks to support you, and you're taking it and your staff are creating all these programs and training entrepreneurs and stuff like that. But because you're not involving us, we're not getting value. Our value is coming from the return on involvement and the return on engagement, not the return on investment. We have no notions that if we're a law firm or a technology company, that if we write a $500 check to be a member of your organization, that we're going to get $500 of value back. But we want to be involved because we want to see really cool technologies. We want to meet really nice and interesting entrepreneurs. We want to meet other people that have similar interests so that we build our own networks. And we want to feel like we're contributing to the community. And we're saying, that doesn't seem like a very intuitive model. But really, it's a shared risk, shared reward model. So the next step is you must task the people with the implementation of it. But then the last step is really you have to measure and respond back to the community. You have to monitor what you're doing and report back to the people who helped you do it so that they feel ownership. So it's shared risk, shared rewards. It's a diversified model. And that's the only way you're going to do it. Because if it's like investing in your own portfolio, if you personally are investing in 2 or 3 companies, your risk is much greater than if you put it into a portfolio that's much broader and can diversify your risk. Okay.
I mean, this discussion gave me a segue to my question, which is that you have advocated not having a hierarchical kind of a system, but a more of an ecosystem where everyone is equal or, kind of working together. Now, in that kind of a situation, I'm sure you have some kind of an organizing principle in mind. How to organize that? Through influence, through some kind of ombudsman rule or something like that, because I've seen that in a lot of incubation systems around the world, some kind of ombudsman rule.
Right.
So what do you recommend in terms of organizing principle?
Well, I mean, that's a longer conversation, but I can tell you that first of all, the organizing principle of, let's say, a program like Connect was, first of all, it was a partnership of equals, so that no one group stood above the other. In fact, the reason that nearly 30 years ago, Connect was put inside the university, and I realize we haven't really kind of told you what Connect, but it's a kind of it's an incubator without walls. No companies actually physically take up residence, but over the 30 years it's been in existence, it's launched close to 2,000 companies that are worth well over 10 billion in market cap. And it's been one of the kind of it's been one of the primary forces in the San Diego ecosystem of having taken San Diego from being an economy dependent on defense, tourism, and real estate that hit a huge downturn when its economy collapsed to being kind of this these technological clusters. And really its role was as an honest, neutral broker. They didn't, again, we never owned Connect, we merely shepherded it. And if you look at the people, the employees within Connect, they're program managers, they're logistical people. All the work is done by people in the community. And really all their role is just coordinating, making sure the meeting rooms are booked, making sure the venues are taken care of. And it's the community that's self-organized. And so there was a set of self-organizing principles, and we can certainly share the actual dictum of that, if that's of interest to you. But yes, you're absolutely right that there's an organizing set of principles. You and then you.
How do you overcome the discomfort and ambiguity involved in teaching Sanity?
Good question. So one of the people we actually have come in and teach at our architects program for this is the head of leadership training for the U.S. Navy SEALs. Because it's all about how do you get comfortable with chaos? Or do you get comfortable with chaos? Everything's constantly moving, because the frustrating thing about this stuff is, we can tell you this as venture capitalists. The minute we think we've gathered all the information's changed. And we never have it all. That's the thing. We never have all the information, and what we do have changes 5 minutes after we get it. So how do you get comfortable with making decisions with that? First thing is pattern recognition. You do it enough. They say on average it costs a venture capitalist or a venture capital firm about $10 million to train a venture capitalist. And that's really all the money that they lose before they kind of figure it out. So a lot of it is pattern recognition. For us, a lot of it is human pattern recognition. So we generally know within 10 minutes after meeting with an entrepreneur if the entrepreneur is investable. Because that's far more important to me than the idea. Ideas come and go. And so a lot of it is around the pattern recognition, doing it, and then having very quick reflexes. That when you make a bad decision, you have to be able to correct immediately. And to be honest, you never want to get comfortable with it, because otherwise you get complacent, and that's when you get pushed sideways. So you're always kind of a little hyper-aware. And so one of the questions we always ask our entrepreneurs is, what keeps you awake at night? And if they tell me they sleep like a baby, there's no way we're going to invest in them. Because if they're going to sleep well, I'm not. So we kind of like it flipped around.
My students tend to react very badly to trying to teach them the value of serendipity.
I'm sorry, the what?
My students tend to react very badly to trying to teach them the value of serendipity.
Well, we should talk afterwards. We've got some great exercises to get them with. In fact, we may actually do one tomorrow around that. Of course, a lot of people, and don't forget, not everyone's meant to be an entrepreneur. Not everyone, what we were talking about, doesn't apply to everybody. Some people, I know people who hate ambiguity. They hate being uncomfortable. There are those people. I'm weird. I love that stuff. In fact, when I get complacent, I get so bored. See, you had a question.
Your thoughts on the key elements to incubating leadership versus companies?
The key insights? People. People are the most important intellectual property. And the thing about these leaders that I was telling you about is they look, smell, some of them, feel, react a lot differently. And so what we need to, I think the single most important trait, or skill, I should say not a trait, skill that an entrepreneurial leader needs to have is the ability to tell a story. It's not how to read a spreadsheet. It's not how to do regression analyses. You can hire people to do that. But is how to be a great storyteller. In fact, one of the classes we do is just on storytelling. We actually have them storyboard and draw out their ideas. Because you want people to lead you, to follow you. You have a great idea. You want customers to believe in you. You want investors to get behind you. And in order to do that, it's a great thing. So we work a lot on the narrative. The other thing about entrepreneurs, how to get them comfortable talking to other people. These are just communication skills. How to look them. So for those of you who have nothing better to do, if you go and actually look at the presentations of Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, and Mark Zuckerberg, and you go back to when they started giving presentations and you look at them today, you see very, very, very different styles. Both Bill Gates and Steve Jobs studied with a woman named Nancy Duarte, who does slidology. She was kind of one of my people who helped me figure out how to do presentations better. And you'll see that their presentation style has gotten a lot differently. When they first started, for instance, like Bill Gates, it was nothing but words. Just bullet point after bullet point. Now there's not a word on his slide. He may have one word and a number. So it's those things.
What's her name?
Nancy Duarte, Duarte, and her company is called Slidology, SLIDE:, OLOGY.
It was very interesting how you said that majority of the startups in Silicon Valley are by immigrants.
Yeah.
I didn't know if there was ever something identified why they tend to start their own companies versus trying to be an employee in someone else's company. But something I've noticed a lot, and I do a lot of things with trying to incentivize starting companies and things, is that a lot of people are kind of brought up to look for a job, to look for a career, look for working for someone else, and if they can't find that, they will leave the area to find that job. And a lot of people don't say, instead of that, why don't I start my own company? It doesn't even register. They got to go to find a job somewhere else. So is it something, and I don't know if that's just a Northeast thing. I mean, you see a lot of people from the Northeast are leaving to go to the South, Southwest, and other places to find jobs. But I mean, is that the culture in the Southwest and other places to leave, or is it more to, why do I need to leave when I can start my own thing? I mean, is it a culture thing? What is it?
So the answer is yes, it is culture. That these, we'll get to that in a second. That these systems, by definition, so it's a bit of a misleading fact that I threw out there, but what it is that these systems are highly self-selecting. The people, it's not strictly a choice that they go there, it's a decision. And the difference is that there's a set of criteria that they're assessing. And I've been asked that question even in San Diego. Well, why isn't San Diego the Silicon Valley? Why does all the capital go to the Silicon Valley, not San Diego? We've got smart people. The reason is because by definition the places are highly self-selecting. One is that you find in these highly competitive environments like the Silicon Valley that A players love to play with other A players. Steve Jobs was famous for only wanting kind of the very, very best of the best in this stuff. So they'd constantly be culling the bottom or thinning the herd on that. For instance, in San Diego, one of the motivating factors for people wanting to move there is they love the work-life balance. They love living on the ocean. They love the idea that nothing's more than 15 or 20 minutes away. They like being able to go to home their families at night. In the Silicon Valley, it's very much a 24/7 culture. You want those people who just go, never, they sleep under their desks at work. So a lot of the immigrants we were talking about, these were highly motivated people who were going to succeed regardless in life. But because of the decisions that they made to come to the Valley, they just happened to succeed in the Valley. Because they figured if I'm going to succeed somewhere, the difference really in the Valley is that when you talk to people in the Valley, they think big. No, they think huge. They don't just think big. There's a line in the movie The Social Network where it says, something like, it's like $1 million company is kind of cool, but $1 billion company is like really cool. They really kind of think that way, where no one thinks in these kind of small little terms. Someone else? Yeah.
There was a related question about the cornerstone of this seems to be the role of cultural transformation, and you've had several questions related to that. And I think your arguments are very compelling, and I happen to be very enthusiastic about moving in that direction. But in a sense, how scalable is this? I mean, Silicon Valley and Austin and Boston are aberrations. You're saying that. They're not the norm. What is it about them that has created this very unique culture? And the people who are drawn there are atypical. They're not typical. Is it possible to create this environment anywhere? In other words, are the elements there, or is the magnet, the attraction, the point you were just making, of bringing these atypical people, I won't use psychological labels, to that environment to work? Or is it both? I mean, what are the essential elements? You need universities, presumably, if you're talking about the power of knowledge and tech transfer and so forth. So you need certain ingredients to be there. So I assume that every environment is not going to be conducive to that, because most of the metropolitan areas in the country are trying to do what we're talking about. I mean, they're looking for how you create that kind of innovative culture. So can you do it?
Excellent question. So the question is can you build these rainforests anywhere? And the answer is probably not. And again, that was never our intent, is to try to figure it out. Two, the idea is not to replicate Silicon Valley, or is not to be Silicon Valley. The title of the book, in some ways, for Victor and I, was unfortunate. Our publisher wanted us to, put in kind of how do you be the next Silicon Valley as a kind of a selling tool. But the one thing we were always big on is that it's not prescriptive. That said, we can help the regions optimize their genetics. So innovation is just not about technological innovation. It's just not about how do we create the next Google or Facebook. Well, China has been incredibly successful of late with reverse innovation, basically taking models that other people have really kind of well developed and tried, and just adapted them for a local economy and done very, very well off of them. We're beginning to see new models of what we're calling 360-degree innovation, where people take innovations, let's say from the US medical devices, and they take them into China and find a way of making them for a tenth the cost, using different materials, maybe stripping off some of the advantages of them, but still providing 80% of the benefit, and creating a product that serves a whole underserved need that the companies who originated the innovation never intended. But then they have the ability to then take that, and the reason we call it 360 is to take it now back into the original markets. Innovation can be organizational innovation. It could also be, how do you take things that have already been developed elsewhere and bring them in just to modernize existing industries to improve quality of life within a community. So not everything is about how do we kind of do what we call the forward innovation, how do we push more stuff out. That said, you're absolutely right. Universities and places of thinking, they can also be federal labs. They can be places where creative thinkers get together to solve problems and be able to think big thoughts. That's where a lot of the disruptive innovation comes. One of the questions related to that that you asked is that, is it almost kind of fatalistic? How does this happen in the first place? So change occurs off of one of four factors. So either there's a crisis, and that's what happened in San Diego. We actually had a crisis. We lost 2 large federal contracts to the city of Austin, Texas for microelectronics consortia, Semitech and MCC. And San Diego was quite embarrassed by the loss of those contracts, because the feedback that came back to us from the reviewers is that it's obvious that your private sector and your industry and government have never even talked to one another, much less collaborated on something like this. So if you're ever going to hope for one of these things in the future, you're going to have to figure it out. And so it was a circumstance that the head of the Economic Development Corporation came and talked with the chancellor and said, this is really embarrassing. And the chancellor of our university, again, it's pure serendipity, had just come from running the National Science Foundation, but before that he was at Stanford for a number of years. And he says, well, what we observed at Stanford is that academics and industry actually have conversations to one another. They depend upon one another because industry funds the research going on inside of a university, and they're often customers for what comes out of the output from it. So there was this kind of natural conversation. The second driver of change is we call it political mandate. And we see that in places like China, where the government says, you will do this, or this will happen. We see this in Russia too. And that's one driver of change. Not particularly sustainable. Because if people don't feel it, certain amounts of it will happen, but not much. The third is social will, which is a group of people say, we want to change as a community because we feel it's important, and if we all agree to that through a social contract, we are going to make a change. And then the fourth is just natural evolution. That sometimes things just progress at their own pace. There's a slide that I don't have up here, but it says, science progresses one funeral at a time. So sometimes there's just kind of a natural order to what you're doing. That said, for the region here, I absolutely believe it can happen. We've seen it happen in, as I said, we've seen it happen in Palestine. We're doing the work in Saudi Arabia. We just, we're about halfway through the project in Colombia, and it's absolutely amazing what Colombia is doing. We're starting a project in Medellin. Last month, Medellin in Colombia was named the most innovative city in the world by the Wall Street Journal. It beat out New York and Tel Aviv. These places are doing it because there's an amazing alignment, which I've also seen in New York City, between the top-down leadership being visionary and pulling ideas up, but not pushing so hard down that it stifles it. And it's allowing the organic nature of what happens at the bottom to be empowered and encouraged. And it's almost like alternating current. That you can see things that can actually, where a lot of the important knowledge that's being generated by these millennials, by the students, by the crazy thinkers in the community, has the ability to get pushed up. And the people at the top who have knowledge and resources have the ability not only to push those resources down, but actually pull these things up as well. And so I absolutely believe it can be done. And they have, in places like Colombia and other places we're working around the world, they've got an additional problem that you don't have here, which is this, they had to overcome massive corruption. In the rainforest, it's equivalent like, okay, you tell them to plant their garden, but first thing is you've got toxic soil. You know, you have to remediate the soil. So that's been good. Yeah.
I actually have a question. You can tell me if I'm right or not, and that's what my question is. It's more of an observation. So what we have locally right now is a very, very vocal, very small minority who makes life miserable for the silent majority. Trying to change that is probably the first thing that has to happen. Second of all, the observation I'm making is that you're pretty much taking some of the simplest ways of creating success, which is trust, love of your neighbor, everybody's thoughts count. Nobody is any better than anybody else. That's one of the things that my mother always taught us, is that we're not the best, but there isn't anybody better than we are. And you've taken all those things and you've created a framework that, you know, being able to fail. You have to be able to fail. I mean, our greatest president ever, Abraham Lincoln, failed numerous times before he became the greatest president in our history. So you're saying pretty much that it's common sense that creates success. Use the common sense of being able to do unto others as you will have them do unto you. You will create success. So we have to break through that whole barrier that we have here in Oswego, and maybe even in the entire county. I'm just talking about what I know locally, and saying we're not going to let a very vocal, very small minority rule the silent majority and create success by doing that. And we don't have to become the next Silicon Valley. Maybe we should be wondering when someone's going to say, when are we going to be the next Oswego?
That's what you should do. And also, the thing about common sense is it's not very common.
No.
So you make an assumption there. But, you know, your points are well taken. Right? Yeah.
You mentioned shepherds, and there's a ripple effect. Progress is a ripple effect. But when you mention shepherds, shouldn't they be accessible? I mean, should the flow be able to reach back to them?
Yeah.
And are shepherds really that available to everybody?
Yes.
What kind of program would you put together to make them very accessible?
Well, I mean, I haven't spent enough time here, but and I'm not here to advocate the Connect program, but that's one that is insanely accessible. It's not only accessible, but it's highly scalable, because its ability to scale has nothing to do with, in fact, Connect itself, even today, and San Diego is still the largest one, is only, it's only 15 staff people. And the budget is less than $3 million for the entire program, and yet they do 350 events a year, one almost every day. They do it because the community does them. They just merely shepherd them, and they have 18,000 volunteers that volunteer their time in the community. They have 2,000 domain experts and people who volunteer some portion of time during the year for it. Now, of course, that all took time to develop and trust and processes to do. But it just shows you the impact that kind of something small and flexible can have when an entire community owns it. And that's the reason it spun out of the university, is because other people in the community said, we don't own this thing if it's inside the university. You know, but the reason it was put in the university is to protect it years ago from outside commercial interests. So it served a purpose then.
Great. We appreciate the extra time that Greg has provided us tonight.